revolutionary optimism. This is kind of in a weird way, my love letter to Denver communists slash all the work that has happened, but it's also a theory that is relevant and useful. Oh, sorry. With the recent war in Ukraine, enormous costs and living hikes, the current recession that we're rolling into, the abolishment of abortion rights, it's hard to be optimistic. However, as international revolutionaries, we must now more than ever remain optimistic in order to continue to win our fellow workers to anti-capitalist policy or politics. God dang. So what do we have to be optimistic about? There is a lot, actually. A decade ago, if you had mentioned you were a Marxist or a communist, you would have been looked at with bamboozlement or met with extreme vitriol. We can look back in history as Marxists and we can see that it's only been worse and everything like that. The United States has spent decades and billions of dollars to keep us ill-informed and living in fear of anything that questions the status quo. With the campaign and election of Donald Trump, many became awakened to politics, albeit capitalist politics. Once in office, Trump began, as Jason likes to call it, his smash and grab tenure. And I love that description of it, which further infuriated people who had otherwise been apolitical. The outbreak of COVID-19 and murder of George Floyd ignited a powder keg that we still see smoldering today. Across the globe, people began to organize for protection around health and housing, as well as human rights. The institution of policing was a topic that many grappled with for the first time. They saw the contradictions in the system, but didn't know where to channel the energy. The conversation of overthrowing capitalism was no longer a taboo or abstract idea. In the Denver communists, we have seen a growth in commie-curious individuals, as well as a growth in committed cadre members, which stemmed from these movements. Currently, we hear the word capitalism and assign this vision of visions of grand gesture or hopefulness for something bigger and better. That's because we have been raised and conditioned that growth is the only sign of progress or, in quote, optimism. In actuality, this is a pessimistic outlook because it can limit the scope of what is possible. As the article by Antonio Balmer states, when a seismic shift occurs in nature, all the accumulated pressure that had built up silently over a long period of apparent calm is suddenly released, instantly transforming the landscape. The past few years have definitely transformed the landscape, bringing many to the idea of a world outside of the bonds of capitalism. However, the prevailing attitude amongst the left, and when I say left, I say this in quotes, the left, the mainstream mainstream publications and even socialist outlets would have you think otherwise. To explain revolutionary optimism, we must first look at revolutionary pessimism. In the Balmer article, he gives a few examples of contemporary Jacobin pieces that seek to bring a reality check to its readers. In one article, he cites the author. The author argues the reader to give up the fantasy of smashing capitalism. Capitalism is not smashable. At least if you really want to construct an emancipatory future in one way or another, you have to deal with capitalist structures and institutions. Taming and eroding capitalism are the only valuable options. The only way for things to change is not to tame them or hope they erode over time. If that were the case, we would still have enslaved people around the world. We can look. If we'd still have feudalism, we'd still have serfdom, we would still have these things that are horrible, but we as humans have obviously thrown these yokes off. It should go without saying that taming and eroding are not what we like to do with capitalism. As we discussed last week, we want to smash the state. Therefore, this type of rhetoric is extremely harmful to the left. Urging could-be revolutionaries to be more down to earth and work with The work within the constraints of capitalism is not just pessimistic, but it is also counter-revolutionary. It can be even more discouraging when we take into account the fact that many in organizing spaces share this outlook, including people leading the resurgence of the labor movement that we currently are witnessing. As Ballmer states in the article, for the budding socialist left in the US, this kind of timidity can only prolong the infant stage of the movement's development at a time when it could be playing a critical role in transforming the political landscape. A serious campaign in the labor movement for the creation of a mass socialist party would get an enthusiastic echo among the millions. Instead, calls to the strategic and realistic, i.e., by giving up on outlandish attempts to break with the Democratic Party, threaten to control the energy of socialists back into the well-worn and limited channels of local activism and perpetual base building. That lovely word we love. So, as revolutionaries, we should be challenging this type of pessimism as it seeks to tame our politics and channel our hope for the future into safer vehicles such as the DSA or other reformist projects. We should always call for revolution in our lifetime. What is revolutionary optimism, though? Revolutionary optimism, as I think of it and see it, is meetings like this. It's the surge in study groups, in members, it's enthusiasm around communism. It's in the international connections we have made, the international attendees that come to meetings. It's in the international struggles that are going on elsewhere. It's the global collective awakening that we have been witnessing. The article gives an example of the uprising of workers' rebellion in Greece in 2015, when the state finally had an answer for the ruthless austerity measures put in place after the 2008 crisis, which we are rolling into, if not a worse crisis right now. The people of Greece had spent years mobilizing the masses, including 35 general strikes and months-long occupations of city squares to voice their anger at the living conditions under the state. This culminated in the election of a left government who within 6 months capitulated to the IMF and international finance capital. However, the author suggests that an organized force of just a few thousand Marxists could have easily shown the way outside of this crisis. Just 24 weeks separated the electoral victory from its betrayal of the people to international capitalists. The same amount of time which Bolshevism had required in 1917 to grow from 8,000 to 250,000 members as events pushed wider layers of the class to draw revolutionary conclusions. If a program for socialist revolution had still appeared too abstract or far-fetched to the average Greek worker in January 2015, there can be no doubt that 6 months later it would have received a mass echo. Revolutionary optimism doesn't mean that revolution is around the corner, that we are totally organized and ready so we can sit back and wait. It is not a utopian idea. Rather, it is an idea that is grounded in material reality. It is a historical point of view, one that looks at the present moment of history and sees the awakening of class consciousness, and instead of letting that lead to despair, leads us to action. The past century is full of mass uprisings that awaken the historic instinction of the working class. In many instances, for all practical purposes, power was in their hands. What was lacking was a conscious leadership with a revolutionary program that could channel the immense creative energy of the workers, recognizing that the workers had power and needed to defend it and proceed to restructure the economy and the state. It is our duty as revolutionaries and Marxists to see the pressure building within the working class and be prepared to harness it when the explosion finally happens. Ballmer states that the October Revolution was made possible because the thousands of cadre in the party ranks had passed through 2 decades of training in the makeshift Revolutionary Academy of Bolshevism. Hundreds of clandestine study circles and discussion groups that collectively embedded these individuals within the dynamic revolutionary worldview offered by Marxist theory. Our roots need to be in the working class if we want to win them to socialism. Specific to the Denver Communists and our network, over the last few years, locals who stayed together after the split of the International Socialist Organization have worked tirelessly to build a network of revolutionaries who could rely on each other for political development, as well as a conduit for revolutionary action during these systemic shifts we have seen. Through this work, a battered and bruised few turned into a functioning network that held its first virtual conference that saw people attend from all over the country and world. We have seen new members step up with confidence and fill roles that they may have never fathomed themselves doing. Historically, we can have a level of optimism when it comes to the task of just organizing. During Lenin's time, communists had to organize underground. There is no need for us to weirdly romanticize state repression. We should always be taking advantage of the fact we can organize above ground and openly. This is because of hard-fought battles past workers had struggled for. Compared to the quote-unquote good old days, millions of American workers and youth, as well as workers and youth around the world, are ready to talk about socialist revolution.